If you're studying ecology or interested in doing so, what everyone seems to talk to you about is a career in academia. Get your master's, get your PhD, do some postdocs, do some research, become a professor eventually, and do what you love. It makes it seem that this is the most common route, and while people certainly can go that way, there are actually quite a few more options that I'm going to cover. So let's discuss. Thanks for everyone watching. This is Wild Watch Careers, helping you take your love of nature, wildlife, and the outdoors and turn it into a fulfilling career. Today we're going to talk about what can you actually do with an ecology degree. Before we begin, just wanted to mention to anyone that's interested in getting some free job coaching to kick off your career in ecology, environmental science, or any natural science field like biology, there's a free course that you can follow by going to the link in the description. I highly recommend it. The site also has resume templates and a job search directory that you can gain access to with a free account. So be sure to check it out. Also be sure to follow this channel and like the video if you want to see more content like this. So with all of that being said, today I'm going to talk about what career paths are there. You love nature, you want to work outside, what are the options? We're going to just start with the most obvious one right off the bat, the thing you see the most every time whenever you're at university, and this is academia. This is basically the track that the university best prepares you for and the one you sort of least need me to discuss probably, because it's like the first one that comes to mind. The thing is, everyone you were exposed to during university is in that track, right? So you automatically have a filtered, biased view because all of your professors, everyone, they went the academia route. An academic career in ecology or any natural science really involves conducting research and teaching scientific theory and literature about the relationship between organisms and the environment. For example, the interactions between species, the functioning of ecosystems, and the environmental impact of human activities. So the type of positions you're seeing here are field and lab tech, there's internships, contract positions, there's a research assistant, PhD candidate, often paid depending where you live, postdoctoral researcher, same thing, and then of course professor or lecturer or tutor. Your work is involved in conducting original research, then publishing your findings in scientific journals, and teaching courses in ecology and related subjects, and a lot of writing, so paper writing, grant proposals to get funding, etc. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with this track. I'm not trying to make it seem like this is not a good track. It's just that probably most of you coming here already know about this track, and I will cover it. But I think it's important to think that there are quite a few options. So I have done several lab and field tech positions. I sort of did a research assistant paid internship once. I also almost got a PhD once, but at the end of the day, it's actually very competitive and kind of based on who you know and luck and right place, right time. You also have to travel and you have to deal with seasonal work a lot until you actually become that professor, that tenured professor that gets to do whatever they want all the time. All I'm trying to say is that sometimes university will make it seem like this is the only path, like you can just kind of only go the university route, the academia route, and that's because you're getting a filtered view. You're only talking to people that walk that path. That's who your professors are, that's who your TAs are, and so on. So let's start off with the first one. Besides that, we've got ecological consultants. So ecologists or ecological consultants. What is this? So basically what this means is people want to build stuff. It could be roads, infrastructure, buildings, and they need to have somebody that is there to assess what would be the impact were they to do so. Companies need that. Basically to facilitate better environmental decision making. So the type of work that you do includes conducting field surveys for specific plant or animal species and analyzing this data, environmental impact assessments. You do an impact analysis and you might propose ways to mitigate or avoid the adverse impact of the project wherever the building is taking place, the construction. You have to report these findings often to a non-technical audience. Ecological consultant is a very common non-academia option outside of university. You would typically work for environmental consulting firms, which are then contracted to do impact assessments, or you might be directly hired by a government agency, NGO, or private company, for example, in the energy, mining, or agriculture industry. This is a more stable job option than academia in the short term, but it is still competitive to get you that first job that gives you that 1 to 2 years experience to jumpstart that career. The next one I'm going to cover is forestry. So a career in forestry involves the management and conservation of forested land and natural resources. Foresters work to ensure the sustainable use and protection of forests for a variety of purposes, including recreation, wildlife habitat, and the production of wood and other forest products. There's a variety of jobs in forestry, like you could start out as restoration ecologist doing a sort of landscaping role where you're basically doing landscaping work like planting trees. You might also be more on the scientific side where you actually gather data like on the quality of soil or water. You might survey and map forest areas and keep record of logging activities. You could also be doing more controlled burnings or firefighting where you try to suppress and control forest fires. A lot of people also get into the logging industry. There's specialized jobs where you can learn to use various types of sometimes pretty high-tech equipment to help fell trees, clear brush, dislodge stumps of trees, etc. Equipment like bulldozers, hoist cranes can actually be kind of cool sometimes if you're into that stuff. I myself once participated in a forestry project in Africa where I had to survey and lay down camera traps to track wildlife in a natural forest preserve and later analyze the data to assess the impact of logging and other activities on wildlife. This was for an NGO, the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Some of the pros and cons here are that you do get to work outside in some pretty cool areas. You can also use some interesting technologies like I mentioned above. But some of the cons are, of course, it can be very tiring. So sometimes also dangerous even. So especially if you're in an area with like poisonous plants or like mountain lions or something like that. Also the weather conditions are not always good. So it can be slippery. You might deal with forest fires. You also might deal with like some heavy machinery. I mean, it's not crazy dangerous, but it is a physical demanding job and this is something to consider. Another track you might find yourself in is conservation. So a career in wildlife conservation involves protecting and preserving wildlife and their habitats. Some typical job positions in wildlife conservation include wildlife biologists, conservation biologist, park ranger, zoologist. Wildlife conservationists may work in a variety of settings, including government agencies, nonprofit organizations, zoos, and conservation areas. They may conduct field studies, monitor wildlife populations, implement conservation plans, and participate in environmental impact assessments. They may also work to educate the public and raise awareness about conservation issues. Depending on where you work, where you do this, it could also have some overlap with the job of an ecologist or forester if you are employed at like a Department of Natural Resources for a government agency. Or it could be more focused on zoos, wildlife sanctuaries, where you might work closely with animals, like looking at breeding programs, like a zookeeper, animal caretaker, behaviorist, zoo curator. I myself once did a full-time year-long paid internship at a zoo, studying chimpanzee behavior as part of my graduate program, for example. So that's kind of another conservation route that you could take. In that situation, my supervisor was a zoo curator, and he later went on to work a more corporate role at EAZA, the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria. So you can also do more corporate jobs as like a policy officer, a conservation officer who looks at like the legal aspects of the job, such as implementing policies or programs aimed at conserving wildlife, collaborating with government agencies and other organizations, educating the public about environmental issues. So far we covered some of the more field jobs, some of the stuff that's a little bit more related to working in the field. Now the next category is a little bit more about laboratory jobs. We're going to start off with environmental scientists, more in the realm of organic or inorganic chemistry, where you're kind of checking for organic compounds or like heavy metals or stuff like that. I did this for about 2 years. Basically, we were sent samples from local companies or sometimes EPA samples, and we tested them in a lab. And we also had field techs collect these samples sometimes. So we had to measure for things like chlorine, metals, contaminants, pollutants in these samples. You get to use some cool equipment sometimes, like analytical instruments like HPLC, which is high pressure liquid chromatography, GCMS. You also can do some kind of cool chem stuff if you're into that, like titrations, distillations. You need to have a good understanding of GLP or good lab practices and how to author SOPs, standard operating procedures. So that's an example of a more laboratory type of setting. A little bit more on the biology, microbiology side, you also have biologists or microbiologists, for example, at a pharmaceutical company or biotech. So a career in biology at a pharmaceutical company typically involves research and development of new drugs and treatments for various medical conditions. You also could be more in a production role, so less research oriented, but more just quality control and overseeing that standards are met during production. Biologists in this field may be involved in a variety of tasks, including conducting laboratory experiments to test the efficacy and safety of new drugs, analyzing data and interpreting results to determine the effectiveness of new treatments, immunoassays, DNA RNA extraction, PCR, microscopy, cell culture handling. designing, implementing clinical trials to evaluate the safety and efficacy of new drugs in human patients. There's also a need to understand biostatistics in general and to keep up to date with current research and advances in the field of biology, particularly in areas related to the company's work. Presenting findings and recommendations to management and other stakeholders, writing and submitting reports, papers, and grant proposals to funding agencies. You could also specialize in medical writing or technical writing if you go into this field. This is a typically fast-paced job and can get kind of stressful, but it also generally pays well because there's a lot of money to be made in pharmaceuticals. So I talked a little bit about biotech in the previous thing, but that's also a whole other thing you could do. So this changes a bit when you go into biotech, but the concept in a work environment is often pretty similar. Instead of doing all of the stuff I just mentioned to develop drugs or medicine, you're basically developing biotech products, which is kind of a lot broader, right? So these products are not, they could be related to medicine, but they could also be related to agriculture. For example, if you're testing food or trying to engineer crops to improve yields, you might have biofuels like bioethanol, diesel gas, or make new polymers for the textile industry or skincare products. Really, the list is quite large, but it's the same general thing. You're working typically in a lab environment for some sort of biotech firm. And then there's this kind of category of other, right? So you could go into agriculture, food science, you could be a pharmacist. You could go into data science and analytics, completely unrelated to ecology. That's actually what I currently do. You could be a botanist, an herbologist, a botanical garden. You could go into law enforcement, be a forest ranger or park ranger, like I mentioned before. You could be an environmental lawyer. You could be also a nature guide, a tour guide, an eco guide at a national or state park or amusement park, zoo, safari, whatever. You could work at a farm. You could be some kind of technician, like a wind turbine technician or something, or like a solar installer. Also, really important to know, you can do non-sciencey, non-ecological types of jobs for a greater ecological purpose. Like you could have a degree in business administration or something completely different than ecology, biology, or science, and work as a program lead or project manager, or work in HR, finance, IT, or whatever it is you do for that wildlife or biology related organization. This is also an option for some people that, for instance, they don't want to go get a new degree. Maybe you already have a bachelor's in something else, so you can go ahead and actually still work for an environmental type of firm without having an environmental degree. So that's also an option. All right, so that just about does it for some of the most common jobs that you can work with a degree in ecology, biology, or natural sciences. I hope this is a nice sort of little brainstorm, which lets you see that there's quite a few options out there besides just becoming a professor in a university. And I hope that it gives you a nice overview of what you can actually do with a degree in ecology. If you're interested in finding out more on how to jumpstart your career in ecology, again, check out wildwatchcareers.com. You can make a free account. We have everything from resume templates to that course to a job search directory, which helps you get started in finding out what kind of organizations might be hiring in your area. Go ahead and check that out, and otherwise if you're interested in seeing more content like this, like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, and until next time.